In the quiet hours of an August night, in an unassuming apartment complex on the outskirts of Athens, Georgia, a life ended in violence. A woman lay dead on her living room floor, her body bearing the savage wounds of a killer's rage. At first glance, detectives saw what they believed to be an open-and-shut case. The answers seemed to lie plainly before them. But as they peeled back the layers of this brutal crime, they would uncover a mystery so convoluted, so filled with false leads and dead ends, that it would haunt them for 15 long years. Just when all hope seemed lost, when the case files were destined to gather dust in some forgotten evidence room, the truth would finally emerge through a series of events so improbable, so perfectly aligned by chance, that it could only be described as fate's cruel irony. Pamela Chrysler's story began like so many others. Born in 1953 in the sleepy southern town of Albany, Georgia, she grew up surrounded by the love of a large family. But what made Pamela extraordinary was her boundless capacity to help others. After earning her medical degree, she dedicated herself to the often thankless work of mental health counseling, specializing in addiction recovery. Colleagues described her as the kind of therapist who remembered every client's birthday, working late nights to ensure no one felt abandoned in their darkest moments. In the summer of 2002, seeking new beginnings at 49 years old, Pamela relocated to Athens, temporarily renting an apartment from an acquaintance named Richard while he traveled for work. It should have been the start of an exciting new chapter, asterisk. On August 21st, what began as a routine odor complaint became a homicide investigation. The crime scene told a brutal story: 23 separate stab wounds, defensive cuts on Pamela's hands and arms indicating a desperate struggle, and the eerie presence of that single white sheet carefully placed over her body. Most perplexing? The lack of forced entry. Only the balcony door stood slightly open, its curtains fluttering in the morning breeze. And on the kitchen counter, partially obscured by a coffee stain on the Athens Daily News, one perfect droplet of blood that forensic analysis would confirm didn't belong to the victim. Asterisk. This minuscule stain, no larger than a pencil eraser, would become the silent witness that outlasted every detective's theory, every dead-end lead, waiting 15 years to whisper the killer's name. From the moment detectives brought him in for questioning, Richard Ellis gave off an unsettling vibe. Here was a man who claimed only a passing acquaintance with Pamela, just one dinner date months earlier, yet had handed over his apartment keys without hesitation. His explanation? A simple favor for someone who needed temporary housing. But seasoned investigators sensed something off. During initial questioning, Richard volunteered an oddly specific detail unprompted. Pam always slept with the balcony door cracked open, he remarked casually, wiping sweat from his upper lip. A fact the police had deliberately withheld from the public. Then came the phone call that raised every red flag. While driving back from Florida, Richard phoned the apartment manager not to express shock or grief, but to insist the blood-soaked carpet section be excised and preserved for his own private analysis. His tone, according to the shaken manager, carried more urgency about the carpet than concern for his dead friend. For all his suspicious behavior, Richard's alibi was airtight. Time-stamped receipts placed him at a Tallahassee hardware store during the murder window. Coworkers confirmed his presence at a construction site 400 miles away. Most damning of all, the critical blood droplet found on Pamela's newspaper bore no genetic match to Richard. Yet as detectives reluctantly crossed his name off their suspect list, one nagging inconsistency remained: the complete disappearance of Pamela's vacuum cleaner from the crime scene. Not her jewelry, not her wallet, not even the cash in her nightstand. Just an ordinary, slightly worn Hoover upright vacuum. Asterisk. 3 days after the murder, a break in the case came from the most mundane of places. A cluttered pawn shop on the wrong side of Athens. The clerk would later tell police he knew something was off the moment the kid walked in. Not just the way he kept glancing at the security cameras, or how he accepted the first lowball offer without negotiation. It was the vacuum itself. Still faintly damp when the clerk lifted it, as if someone had hastily wiped it down. The description matched Pamela's missing Hoover exactly, right down to the broken wheel that left a distinctive scrape mark on hardwood floors. But when detectives arrived, the security tapes had already been recorded over. All they had was the clerk's memory of a skinny white male, maybe 19 or 20, with acne scars across his cheeks and a nervous habit of cracking his knuckles. Mrs. Grayson would lie awake for years wondering why she didn't call the police that night. Maybe it was the way he'd stared at her door, not guilt in those eyes, but something colder, calculated. The composite sketch drawn from her description showed a generic white male, the kind of face that blended into every high school yearbook in Georgia. Detectives plastered it on every news broadcast, but no tips panned out. By 2003, the case file was moved to the cold case cabinet, Pamela's bloodstained newspaper clipping and that single drop of stranger's DNA the only pieces of evidence still tagged for future review, until 15 years later, when a computer in Quantico would ping with the match that changed everything. After 15 years gathering dust in the cold case archives, Pamela's murder was cracked open by something far more mundane than detective work: routine probation paperwork. When Abdus Lar-Rowe, a small-time hustler now facing drug charges, swabbed for a mandatory DNA test, the system flagged a match to that single, forgotten blood droplet from Pamela's kitchen. Detectives would uncover the cruel irony that Lar-Rowe had lived mere steps from Pamela's apartment in 2002. A troubled teen with a history of petty theft who'd suddenly dropped out of school that September. During interrogation, his lies spiraled from feigned ignorance to claiming Pamela hired him for odd jobs, then inventing an entire imaginary relationship with the woman twice his age. But the final nail in his coffin came from his own brother's damning prison call, recounting how a teenage Abdus had confessed to shutting up some white lady who caught him mid-robbery. The panicked stabs, the bloody shoes, the stolen vacuum cleaner pawned for drug money. After all those years, the truth was painfully simple: a burglary gone wrong, a life cut short by a kid who chose a knife over running, and justice delayed until a pirated copy of Fast and Furious 8 finally led detectives to their killer. 15 years of unanswered questions finally met their reckoning, not through some dramatic confession or brilliant police work, but through the mundane machinery of justice: a probation officer's routine swab, a database algorithm humming through the night, a brother's conscience finally cracking under the weight of the truth. Lar-Rowe's plea deal brought neither celebration nor closure, only the cold comfort that the man who stole Pamela's future would now lose 2 decades of his own, a twisted symmetry that saw justice served not by the system's design, but through its blind luck. As Pamela's family left the courtroom, the real tragedy lingered: that it took a petty DVD peddler's arrest to solve what years of detective work could not, exposing how many other killers might walk free until fate decides to intervene.